other thing is that now I had to be like, it was just my birthday, and then all the people that I didn't invite to my birthday know that I had a birthday party.
I invited you to mine, and you came to mine. Well, I'm just saying.
It was supposed to be nothing more than a light, playful interview. The kind where Dakota Johnson's effortless humor and warm irreverence would charm the audience without leaving any lasting mark. And yet the entire room shifted the moment she leaned forward, eyes unusually steady, voice calm but deliberate, and said the words that would stop Hollywood in its tracks. "I want to see the real Jamie Dornan." At first the audience laughed, assuming it was another friendly tease about her longtime friend and former co-star. But Dakota didn't laugh, didn't even allow the hint of a smile to soften the moment. And in that brief silence, a truth far heavier than gossip seemed to settle in the air. Within hours, the clip was everywhere, sparking headlines that felt both breathless and bewildered. Dakota Johnson wants the real Jamie? What does she mean? And the internet erupted into speculation that swung wildly from flirtation to jealousy to some unresolved emotional thread between them. Yet anyone who truly understood the history between Dakota and Jamie knew it wasn't romantic implication, nor nostalgia for something they never had. It was about truth, about the rare authenticity forged between two people who had once been stripped emotionally bare in front of cameras and the world. Their beginning had been almost accidental, two actors thrown together to lead one of the most dissected film trilogies of their generation, 50 Shades of Grey. A project so intense, so exposed, that lines between reality and performance blurred in the public imagination. On screen, their chemistry became a cultural phenomenon. Off screen, their bond became something quieter, more private, built not on passion but on a sort of mutual emotional survival. Dakota had admitted in old interviews that those years were the most vulnerable I've ever been. And Jamie had mirrored the sentiment, saying she became his safe place when the scrutiny and pressure threatened to overwhelm him. Fame, however, dusty. Once the trilogy ended, their paths naturally diverged. Jamie retreating into family life and the refuge of privacy. Dakota throwing herself into complex roles that showcased her emotional fearlessness. They were no longer in the same orbit, yet the shadow of 50 Shades, and of the intimate trust they'd shared, never fully disappeared. So when Dakota said she wanted to see the real Jamie Dornan, it wasn't longing, it was recognition. She was speaking as someone who had once seen him stripped of Hollywood armor, someone who understood how fame pushes actors into becoming polished versions of themselves. When the interviewer pressed her gently, "What do you mean by the real Jamie?" she hesitated, then spoke with a softness that felt almost like confession. "People like him, like us, we get so used to performing that we forget who we are underneath. I've seen sides of Jamie the world never will. And I think I just want people to see that too, the human part." Her tone made it clear. This was not flirtation. It was a plea for authenticity in an industry allergic to honesty. Fans who had followed their friendship dissected every micro-expression. The slight break in her voice, the way her eyes softened when she spoke his name, and the internet responded with a frenzy of interpretations. Yet beneath the noise, something universal resonated. Commentators began to realize that Dakota's words were less about Jamie specifically and more about the suffocating nature of celebrity itself. How the expectation to perform can swallow the person behind the image. Jamie, true to form, remained silent publicly, though insiders said he watched the clips several times. One source remarked, "He didn't take it as gossip, he took it as truth," because Dakota's words pierced through the careful armor he wore, an armor built from years of managing fame, navigating scrutiny, and protecting his private life so fiercely that vulnerability became something he rationed carefully. Those close to him understood that Jamie had always walked a tightrope between charm and guardedness. He was warm, witty, incredibly grounded, yet selectively open, offering the world glimpses without ever giving away the whole story. Dakota's words suggested she believed something had been lost in that process, a part of him hidden so deeply beneath the persona that he no longer revealed it, even in interviews where authenticity was supposedly encouraged. The moment quickly evolved past the realm of celebrity gossip. Within days, journalists began framing it as a rare, honest commentary on fame's impact on identity. One op-ed in a British magazine argued that Dakota had accidentally sparked a conversation Hollywood has avoided for decades. What happens to a person when fame demands perfection and punishes sincerity? Fans began sharing stories of their own experiences with feeling unseen or living behind emotional armor, turning the viral moment into a surprisingly profound cultural reflection. Psychologists commented on how performers, whether actors or ordinary people, often create versions of themselves to please others, slowly drifting away from their authentic selves. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Dakota's sudden seriousness made more sense when one looked closely at the timeline. Jamie had weathered a deeply painful chapter in recent years, the loss of his father in 2021, a grief he rarely spoke about publicly, but one that changed him in ways only those closest to him truly understood. He had quietly retreated, becoming more private, more protective, more selective about what parts of himself he allowed the world to see. Dakota, who knew him during the early rise of his career, knew the version of Jamie before that grief hardened him in subtle ways. Perhaps, knowingly or not, she was acknowledging that she missed that softness, that unarmored version of him who used to share the backstage of his mind more freely. Her words, then, were less about the past and more about the present, a recognition that fame, grief, responsibility, and time had reshaped someone she once knew intimately. By the end of the week, the public conversation shifted entirely. What began as viral speculation transformed into a broader reflection on the emotional cost of performing one's life in front of cameras. One commentator summarized it perfectly. Dakota wasn't asking for Jamie. She was asking for something the industry doesn't let people keep: their real selves. And unexpectedly, people listened. Interviews across Hollywood referenced the moment. Actors spoke about exhaustion, about the pressure to always appear composed, about the parts of themselves they rarely showed. Dakota herself did not clarify or retract anything, allowing the moment to stand as it was: raw, unpolished, sincere. And Jamie, though still silent publicly, reportedly appreciated the honesty, telling a friend that it was strange to be seen so accurately by someone you don't see often anymore. It was bittersweet, a reminder that some connections linger even as life pulls people in different directions. In a world built on curated perfection, Dakota Johnson had accidentally pulled back the curtain, reminding millions that behind every polished interview chair sits a person, messy, complicated, textured, trying to navigate the impossible balance between who they truly are and who the world expects them to be. And in doing so, she offered not just a glimpse into Jamie Dornan, but into the fragile humanity of
the fact that this is a newsworthy event in in our world right now is pretty Shaka Khan to me.
Johnson cleared up the
It was never really about stirring scandal or reviving old Hollywood gossip. It was, as Dakota Johnson later admitted, about wanting to remind Jamie Dornan that he was still allowed to be human, still allowed to slip out of the polished persona he had spent years perfecting, still allowed to exist without armor. Yet even as she said it, a question lingered in the air, soft but insistent. What exactly had she seen all those years ago that no one else had? What version of him lived in her memory, untouched by fame, untouched by fear, untouched by the machinery of an industry that strips its actors down to symbols rather than people? For Dakota, that answer was obvious, almost sacred. She wanted the world to know that beneath the charm, the discipline, the tightly managed narrative, there was a man she had once watched break, rebuild, and grow in front of her eyes. And perhaps more poignantly, she wondered whether Jamie himself remembered that version of him, the one who had existed before the cameras, before the global obsession, before the weight of expectation shaped him into someone perpetually careful. Her words didn't simply reopen a conversation. They cracked open something far deeper than gossip, something that touched on the aching human desire to be seen without judgment. The days that followed her interview felt strangely familiar to Jamie, as if he were reliving years of headlines collapsing onto him all at once. His phone buzzed endlessly, friends asking what Dakota meant, journalists fishing for quotes, even former co-stars forwarding clips with raised eyebrows. He answered none of them. He didn't need to. He had watched the moment alone in his living room the night it aired, the flicker of the television lighting his face as Dakota's voice, steady and disarmingly honest, echoed across the studio. "I want to see the real Jamie Dornan." She had not laughed. She had not softened the blow with a joke. That seriousness was what unsettled him most, because for entertainment. For Jamie, it was recognition, a reminder from someone who had once known him at his most exposed, that he had been hiding for far too long. Over the years, Jamie had become a master of quiet disguise. The polite replies on red carpets, the warm smile in interviews, the effortless charm. None of it was false, but all of it was curated, a performance in its own right, crafted to protect the fragile parts of him fame had never been kind to. Dakota had always seen past that. When they met on the set of 50 Shades more than a decade earlier, both were navigating their own uncertainties. She was bold yet guarded, carrying the complex legacy of a Hollywood family. He was gentle yet unsure, still learning the cost of visibility. Together, under the relentless pressure of a franchise that consumed their lives, they forged something rare. A trust born not of romance, but survival. They learned each other's silences, understood each other's fears, and in that shared vulnerability glimpsed fragments of truth the public would never